So, thank you for joining us today for what I'm sure will be a really interesting and insightful discussion on women in library leadership. I'm Vicky Williams, I'm Chief Executive of Emerald Publishing, and I will be your host for today. I'm really delighted to be joined by three fabulous female leaders on our panel, all with very different stories and perspectives to share. So I would like to start by asking each of you to introduce yourself and to talk a bit about your career journey so far. And I will start with Sandra, if that is okay.
Yes, thank you, Vicky. My name is Sanda Erdeles, and I'm the Dean at the School of Library Information Science at Simmons University. My background is in information science. I'm an information science researcher who focuses on human information behavior. And I have a pathway that took me here to Simmons University from being a Fulbright scholar, starting in my homeland, Croatia. So,
Okay, thank you. Thanks for being with us. Dracine, can I come to you?
Sure. Racine Hodges. I am AUL for Collection Services here at Duke University. I started my career as a resident librarian at The Ohio State University, and I've been a practicing librarian for nearly 20 years, and much of that time I've spent in leadership one way or another. And so I've been in community, a lot of intersecting communities as a resident, as a librarian of color, and just as a woman in leadership. So,
Thank you. Thanks so much. And Kara.
Hi, I'm Kara Watley. I'm Vice Provost for Libraries and University Librarian at the University of Missouri. This is a new position for me. I've been here not quite 3 months. I came from Caltech, where I was the university librarian there. My background is as a science librarian. I have a master's and a bachelor's in biology, as well as my MLIS. And I've been a subject librarian for biology and agriculture at Texas Tech, the life sciences librarian at NYU, where I was also the head of science and engineering. So I am a science librarian who has risen to library leadership, and I think we're a little bit of a rare breed. So nice to talk to you all today.
Yeah, great. Thank you all so much for joining me today. And I'm sure we'll dig into kind of different aspects of your career journeys as we talk through some of the points we want to cover today. So let's get into some questions then. I shared this with all of you as we were preparing for the panel. So at the live Charleston event, we were promoting this session at the Emerald stand, and a gentleman came up to the stand and said, do we really need this? Do we still need to be talking about women? So that is my first question to you all. Do we still need to be talking about women in leadership? Why is this still such an important conversation? Kara, I'll start with you if that's okay.
Sure. I think we need to have the conversation because there are still barriers and challenges. If you look at a profession like librarianship that is overwhelmingly female dominated, and you look at the leadership in those libraries, and the leadership is much disproportionately male compared to the overall profession, I think we can just stop right there. I mean, but there are plenty of other reasons why we still need to be having this conversation.
Yeah. Tracy, anything to add on that?
yeah, of course, I can't help but bring up politics because that's just in my nature. But I feel as though we have to observe the recent US election and the outcomes of that. Regardless of your personal politics, I think it's really interesting that, a woman for the second time was put forward and, was not able to successfully be elected despite her qualifications. And I'm sort of interested in unpacking that because, my question is always, what does it take for a woman to be at the pinnacle of power in a given situation. So
yeah. Yeah, and that absolutely shows that we do need this conversation, especially with women's rights going backwards rather than forwards, I think, in many instances.
Yeah.
Sandra, come to you.
Yeah. As I said, given my background from coming from Croatia and developing my academic career here in the United States, I've been very sensitive to the notion that very often, we see opportunities for women, maybe only in the context of one cultural environment. And obviously, if we look at the position of women around the world, in our profession, outside of our profession, there is definitely a need to ensure that women are paid attention to and supported as they grow in the various type of leadership positions. I feel that in the United States, obviously there are a set of political issues currently, but there is some predictability about where maybe some of the problems may appear. We can talk about work and life type balance as you are trying to juggle career and children and various family opportunities. But if you leave from this environment and look around the world, I feel that the issues are much more basic, whether women are even anywhere close to the table where decisions are being made. And we need to be cognizant about that and really keep this topic going on.
Just to dig into that a little bit more, you just mentioned work-life balance there, Sandra, and I think there was a lot of research after the pandemic that showed that women and their careers suffered disproportionately during that time and after that time. In your profession, do you see work-life balance as still an issue? Do women still have to make more choices than men when it comes to work-life balance? Does anyone want to answer that?
I was gonna say yes. I think there are still choices that women have to make, regardless of whether they are, a parent or if they are a caregiver. There are choices that they have to make that I think men just don't have to if they are married or if they don't have those responsibilities as a default. So I do believe that is the case. I think, like you suggested, Vicky, the pandemic demonstrated the impact on women in particular who either went home because of caregiving needs, or, to provide the additional support for the family. And that has real consequence in terms of earning. We talked about the gender pay gap. I think I saw recently on CBS, I believe CBS News, there was a recent story about, for the first time in 20 years, the gender pay gap regressed. It was by 1 cent, but it's still a regression in that 82 cents to the dollar that a man makes. So I think it continues to be an issue in terms of making those difficult choices about work investment versus life investment.
Yeah. And do you see, in terms of that work-life balance and being visible in the workplace, do you think that is a problem? Cara, can I come to you on that? Do you think women suffer again disproportionately because they might not always be as visible? Do you need to be visible and present to get those career opportunities?
I think traditionally, yes. And I I hope that, the pandemic has taught us some things about how we could make different choices and do things differently. Um, but I don't know if we're quite there, right? And, we're seeing much more requirements to be physically present than than we have over the last few years. So I think that is definitely still a challenge. I also think that I feel like there are opportunities for us as leaders to think about what behaviors we normalize within within our organizations and how we set expectations. And this is one of those areas that I think, we can use our power to make some positive changes. One of the things that has come to me a few times in my career is the need to make schedule changes to accommodate particularly new mothers and their return to the workforce. And that's something that is within my power to be able to do. And it may seem like a small thing, but it allowed multiple women to stay in the workforce.
Yeah, I do think that's really powerful to use your position in that way. Absolutely. Sandra, do you have anything to add on that?
Yes, there is also an opportunity for women to redefine what the notion of being a leader is. I feel that historically the notion of leadership is connected with some kind of forcefulness, some type of I know the best, I'm the one, like definitely moving and shaking and being completely visible and into your face type of leadership. I guess some recent political developments maybe are reinforcing that some people still think that this is the way how you do it. But I feel that women bring to the table different type of emotional intelligence that supports more collaborative leadership, leadership that is through understanding, leadership through reinforcing others rather than self-promoting and being the one who always knows the best. And I feel that that's the future for the humanity in general, not just, for being a leader. So I have hope for women bringing that component of different type of emotional leadership, emotional intelligence to the concept of leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, let's move on to something that's a bit more about the system. So there is this saying in feminist literature that we should fix the system, not the women. I think for a long time we've tried to fix the women, and the women are not really the problem. So I'm interested in if you see any systemic issues for women in leadership, thinking particularly about the library profession, where you've seen progress and where there is work still to do. Draceena, I'll come to you first on that if I can.
That's a really good question. I think some of the challenges have to do with opportunity. Opportunity not only just for being in leadership, but for leadership development, getting the experience you need to be qualified to be in the pool to compete with others. And, not everyone comes to leadership naturally. It's, some people have it and it needs to be developed. They need, resources, they need skill development, or to cultivate instincts that they already have. And so I think that's an opportunity, that's a systemic issue that needs to be addressed. I know there are leadership development programs. I myself have benefited from those. But I had people who, with intention, put me forward for those types of opportunities, and they are limited. So, you're competing against others who are more willing to raise their hand and be like, pick me, I want to go forward. And as opposed to someone seeing in you that you have what it takes to be a good leader and sort of putting you forward. So I would think that is probably where the system feels a little bit more stacked against women who could be excellent leaders.
Yeah. Kara?
I think the expectations that we have for leaders need to be maybe a bit more realistic rather than aspirational. Studies have shown that women and people of color will not put themselves forward for jobs if they don't meet all of the criteria listed. And in most cases, we don't actually need somebody to have all of the skills that we're looking for, right? We need someone who has some or most of the skills, and the drive and willingness to learn and grow to develop the other skills, right? So do we really need to set the expectations as high as they are, right? And what Dracine said, I think is really important. We need to also encourage people to, particularly women, to step out of maybe their comfort zone a little bit. And I think that there's something to be said about redefining what it is we value in leadership. And I think that was something that both of you, Dracine and Sanda, said was, uh, are we needing somebody to be, assertive and dominant, or do we need somebody who's going to center the people in the organization first, and support the staff? And I think that's really important. I can't remember who said it now, but I was in a room of other library leaders, and they said the library is, most people, when they think of the library, they think of the building with the books, right? But the library, the modern library, is really the people in the library, right? And so if that really is what the library is, then we need to center leaders who are centering and supporting the people in the library.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
Mm.
Sandra?
This is really a great question in terms of how do we define these systemic barriers. And I feel that there might be inherent problem with measurement. How do we know whether there are sufficient number of women leaders? If we only focused on how many CEOs or like top level executives, well, maybe perhaps not everybody wants to be a CEO. How do we, maybe that aspiration, if you don't have it, doesn't necessarily mean that you don't want to be a leader. So how do we grow and create systems for developing leaders through variety of activities that are developmental? And then I'm sure aspiration will appear that somebody really wants to get to the very top of very tops. So I feel that that's one of the systemic barriers, that this element of inherited competitiveness, that you always want to be on the top, somehow comes from this metaphor of the sports. And then if you translate this metaphor to women in leadership, I'm not saying that some women may not be motivated. Obviously there are many women in sports, but perhaps some other form of modeling, storytelling, hearing examples, how people resolve situations will be more convincing as a method. So this might be one of the systemic barriers, that we use wrong methods and models or metaphors to promote interest in leadership among women.
Thank you. I mean, you've all developed your careers to a leadership position. Have you seen positive movements in your career, in your career journeys, in the career spans that you've had? Seen positive movements for women?
Well, I would just like to share that when I became an AUL here at Duke, at the time, I was, excited and elated for the opportunity. And I remember walking through the hall one day, and I ran into like a veteran staff person who was also a Black woman. And she said to me, "You are the first." And what she meant was I was the first person of color, first Black person to serve on the executive leadership team here at Duke, in the libraries. And I was surprised, but it also brought me to think about the role and how I inhabited it very differently. I've been in the role since 2018, and it's evolved and changed over that time. But the thing I will say now is that there is now another Black female on the executive leadership team. And I'm excited about that because I look around the room and I don't have that feeling I often have, which is, oh, I'm the only chocolate chip in this cookie. And it's exciting to have another person in the room who has lived experiences that are similar. Our backgrounds are different, but I think culturally we have things that we can relate about. And I think it makes our team even stronger. And so I feel very proud that I will say I was the trailblazer, but there was someone who came up and hopefully felt very welcome because I was already there to welcome them into the space. So
absolutely. Yeah, that's brilliant. And Cara, anything to add on that? Any positives that you can give hope to our audience for?
So I think we're both out nicing each other to promote the other person and what they want to say. I think that a lot of the work that people have done in my time as a librarian to really start having these conversations, I think is making a positive change. I think there are some things that I faced at the beginning of my career. I actually had an HR person say once when talking about salaries that there was a librarian discount. I don't think that we're experiencing, at least not in that same way. So I think that's a positive moving forward. I do think representation is incredibly important, and we want to be able to see in leadership teams. We want to be able to see ourselves in leadership teams, right? And so I really enjoyed Dracene's story. So I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah, so Santa?
I have to add that I enjoy this immense privilege to be at Simmons University that at the undergraduate level is women's or oriented university. Oriented towards individuals who identify themselves as women. And as such, there is so much support in leadership in many ways. But this is not where I started. And in many ways, I feel thankful to be able to develop myself as a leader in this country, coming as an immigrant from another country without a lot of understanding how systems work here, and this not being seen as a disadvantage. So I do feel there are positive developments for women to find their space, regardless of where they're coming from, if they have motivation and desire to contribute. And I feel that our discipline of library and information science is one typically maybe more open to these type of diversity elements and aspirations maybe than some other fields because of the nature of how we interact with each other, our commitment to openness of information and other ways of life that maybe in other fields are not as present.
Thank you. Well, unbelievably, we're running out of time. We've got about 5-6 minutes left for the last question. And Dracene, you led us into this one beautifully with your story, because I think as women in leadership positions, I feel this myself as well. You have a responsibility to others following in your footsteps, I think. So what advice would you want to give aspiring female library leaders who are listening into this conversation? Can I start with you, Dracene?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sort of the responsibility and advice I sort of think about is, making sure you have people, making sure you have people you trust to ask difficult questions. I sort of try to be the anti-gaslighter for people who put that trust in me, because I think that happens a lot for women in their experiences, especially in leadership, where you kind of feel gaslighted about the experience you're having or what your expectations might be. So it's always good to have someone who's going to speak truth to power or tell you maybe the good, the bad, and the ugly, because those are the things that happen. So I feel like that is really important for you to have people you trust. You need to have a support system. So
Absolutely agree. Sandra, I'll come to you next.
Thank you. My recommendation would be identify what your strengths are, what you contribute to your environment, what is your uniqueness, and then work with those. We all tend to focus on what are our minuses, what are negative sides. And, obviously, if something is a huge minus, figure it out, but focus on your strengths and take steps as they come as opportunities. Life is not a straight line. Life takes you back and forth, a little bit up, a little bit down, but being persistent, knowing what your strengths are, knowing what you contribute to your organization will allow you to grow and find mentors, find people who maybe are similar to your life paths, and then work with them to grow and reach where you want to go. And if you don't want to, that's fine too. It's not that everybody needs to become a leader. You can be a leader on your level, so that would be my recommendation.
Thank you. And Kara, you have the last words on this.
So I really like what you said, Sanda. I like to call that personal leadership. I think no matter where we are in an organization, we actually do have an opportunity to lead. Building on a little bit about what you said about mentors, I think that we also have to take ownership of finding our own mentors sometimes. I think a lot of us tend to think that that's just going to happen organically, and it doesn't always. And in my experience, people in this profession are very generous with their advice if you seek it out. They may not come to you and say, "Hey, let me give you some tips," but if you ask them, they will share. So to anybody out there watching this in the virtual conference, if you ask us, we will share. And the other thing that I would say is, we are our own harshest critics. Other people don't necessarily view us and judge us in the ways that we do ourselves. And there's something that I feel like has come with time and also experience in leadership for me, is an ability to just kind of shrug that off and realize that it's not a big deal, it's not the end of the world, and that I can move on from it. If I learned something from it, even better. But not to be so harsh with ourselves. And I think, Justine, to circle it back around to where you started with having your people, having your advisory board, right? They can also help you come to that realization.
Thank you so much. That's brilliant advice. And I hope people find that really useful. I can't believe that 30 minutes has just evaporated like that, but thank you all so much for joining us for this discussion. I've certainly learned something and I've really enjoyed it. So thank you again, and thank you all for listening.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.